The residential property's first-hand sales ordinance is now in operation.
From alleyways and boulevards to the busy streets and markets around the world, follow Ishai Golan on his culinary journey. Explore the country's history and culture through their unique dishes. Thursday, street food around the world at 8 on Pearl.
I'm not what you would call a catch. And I'm definitely not the guy you bring home to your mother. I work long hours, I run with a bad crowd, I lie, I cheat, I steal, and I promise I'll never remember your birthday. Seriously, I'm no good for you.
But one day, I might just save you.
What's wrong with breaking the rules? Raising a little hell.
Arrow, Monday to Thursday night on Pearl's Midnight Drama.
New trial for man accused of the brutal murder of his parents after jurors find evidence too upsetting. Slower growth in mainland tourist numbers. And the day after Robin Williams, film fans say goodbye to Lauren Bacall. Good evening and welcome. A man accused in the gruesome killing of his parents will be retried. The jury in the disturbing case was discharged today after one juror asked to withdraw because the evidence was too distressing. Ronnie Samtani with the story.
This morning, a male juror requested to withdraw from the case on medical grounds. The court heard that the evidence presented so far had upset him and was affecting him psychologically. Deputy High Court Judge Michael Stewart Moore agreed to discharge him and said he understood the juror could no longer continue. When the trial began, a 7-member jury panel of 3 men and 4 women was selected. And because a female juror was discharged last week, only 5 jurors remained. According to the jury ordinance, a case can continue with 5 jurors, but the final verdict must be unanimous. Stewart Moore consulted the prosecution and the defense on whether they should continue the case with only 5 jurors. The court heard that 2 of the barristers were against it and wanted to start over, while 1 barrister remained neutral about the matter. After weighing all the factors, the judge concluded that it would be impossible to continue. Deputy High Court Judge Michael Stewart Moore apologized to the jury because they had to listen to some terrible evidence. He decided to exempt them from jury duty for the rest of their lives. He added that 9 jurors will be selected for the next trial. The jury ordinance states that in all civil and criminal trials, the jury shall consist of 7 people, but at the judge's discretion, 9 can be selected. Henry Chow and his alleged accomplice Tse Chun Kei have denied charges of murdering Chow's parents. A new trial date has yet to be set. Ronnie Santani, TVB News.
Mainland tourist numbers continue to drop, with only single-digit growth recorded in June, the lowest in more than 3 years. Rachel Zheng with details.
Is Hong Kong losing its charm to mainland tourists? This woman said the city is small and there aren't too many attractions. This man said nothing here really attracts him. Figures from the tourism board shows there were about 3.4 million tourist arrivals from the mainland in June. That is a 7.8% increase year-on-year, but much lower than the 25.3% year-on-year growth the year before. This is also the first single-digit percentage growth since February 2011. And the growth in the number of visitors from the mainland has slowed since March this year. An association that serves holidaymakers from across the border said the number of tour groups dropped by 20% in June from a year ago. Chairman of the Hong Kong Inbound Tour Operators Association, Ricky Te, cited a number of reasons behind the drop, including local campaigns that make tourists feel unwelcome. And the Travel Industry Council said mainland visitors have been buying fewer luxury goods in recent months. Chairman Michael Wu warned some retail stores at popular tourist hotspots that are paying high rents may not survive, but he believes that's not necessarily a bad thing. Wu thinks Hong Kong should increase its capacity to receive tourists and develop more attractions to maintain its competitiveness. Rachel Jones, TVB News.
Sources say Beijing has already decided on how Hong Kong's political reform will proceed, and opinions are mixed on what, if anything, can be achieved in upcoming talks between pan-Democrat lawmakers and the head of the central government's liaison office. Diane To reports.
The meetings between the Pan-Democrats and the director of the liaison office come just before the National People's Congress Standing Committee discusses Hong Kong's constitutional reform. Local NPC delegate Cheng Yu-tong said today he expects Beijing has already decided on the maximum number of chief executive candidates who can stand for election in 2017. And each CE hopeful will need the support of at least half the nominating committee to qualify as a candidate. Zheng said the central government wants zero risk. It cannot let someone who wants to end one-party rule become Hong Kong's leader. But another local NPC delegate, Peter Wong, said he believes because Zheng is inviting the Pan-Democrats to a meeting, that means Beijing is still willing to listen. Occupy Central organizer Benny Tai said the proposed civil disobedience campaign may go ahead before the government unveils its reform package if the NPC Standing Committee leaves no room for compromise. Protect the economy, protect our livelihoods. The proposed civil disobedience movement has been met with strong opposition. Today, several more groups voiced support for an anti-Occupy Central rally planned for Sunday. The groups accuse the campaign of damaging people's livelihoods. Meantime, there have been concerns about police officers signing a petition against Occupy Central. The police chief insisted today that the force will ensure officers stay politically neutral when they're on duty.
But I believe the public will also understand that as any other members of the public, police officers do have the same civil and political rights. And so unless such rights are sort of restricted by law, then they're entitled to express their personal opinion.
Zheng refused to say whether he signed the petition. He did, however, call on officers not to take part in Sunday's rally. Diane To, TVB News.
Government meetings were held today to discuss how to handle suspected Ebola cases here in Hong Kong. And emergency services have been told to determine if ambulance staff need special protective gear.
When the call is coming to our control center, and our counsel will ask them some simple questions like their clinical sign and symptom, or whether they coming back from the affected areas. And when our consuls they got this information and suspected that this case may be a Ebola virus disease case, then our consul will inform our frontline ambulance crew. Then they will immediately change their PPE, their personal protective gear, to handle this patient.
Shum added that if the call center is unable to get enough information, medics will then make a quick assessment at the scene to determine if protective gear is required. This follows concerns about ambulance staff wearing only face masks when they took a suspected Ebola patient to hospital last weekend. The man from Nigeria later tested negative for the virus. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has declared it is ethical to use untested drugs and vaccines in the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. But it could be months before there's enough of one of the experimental drugs to be distributed. Here's Alan Booknia.
While several of these treatments have been proven to be very effective in non-human primates, and I mean mostly rhesus macaques, none have undergone the test in humans necessary for licensing as proven safe and effective treatments. That does not mean that they are not safe.
More than 1,000 people have died in the worst-stricken countries, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea, with close to 1,000 still in need of treatment. But the WHO cautions that the supply of the U.S. drug ZMapp is almost exhausted. It was used on 2 American aid workers who are showing improvement. A Spanish priest also received the treatment, but it was too late. Miguel Pajares died in a Madrid hospital yesterday. The WHO says the last of the drug is on its way to Liberia for 2 stricken doctors. Canada has said it would provide about 1,000 doses of its experimental vaccine for use in West Africa. Since the vaccine is for prevention rather than treatment, priority has been recommended for healthcare workers. 4 to 6 months would be needed to make large quantities. United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said the UN would be coordinating the international response to the Ebola crisis in close cooperation with the WHO.
Ebola has been successfully brought under control elsewhere, and we can do it in here too.
Nigeria, meanwhile, announced its 3rd death from Ebola today. 36-year-old Jatu Abdul Kadir was a protocol assistant of a West African regional political body and had traveled with Liberian-American Patrick Sawyer. Sawyer brought the disease to Nigeria after arriving from Liberia on July 20th. He died days later. Alan Buckney, TVB News.
More U.S. troops have arrived in Iraq for what the Pentagon describes as a temporary mission to assess the scope of a humanitarian crisis. The response to the growing threat by Islamic militants comes as Iraq's increasingly isolated prime minister continues to cling to power.
Hungry, exhausted, terrified. Thousands of ethnic Yazidis from northern Iraq continue to flood into refugee camps, fleeing the rampage of militants from the Islamic State. They've escaped with little more than the clothes on their backs and stories of torture, abductions, and executions.
The situation in the camp is still kind of primitive, but we are doing our best to upgrade the standard of the camp so that it is at least gaining their dignity.
And we expect to have further flow of refugees in the coming days. We are talking about probably 150,000 people might be crossing. So we are trying to mobilize resources as much as we can.
At the UN headquarters, alarms are growing louder.
The plight of Yazidis and others on Mount Sinjar is especially harrowing. UN humanitarian personnel are in the area doing all what we can. Airdrops of food and water are reaching some of the trapped people. But the situation on the mountain is dire.
The United States has sent 130 more troops to northern Iraq for what's being called a temporary aid mission to assess the growing humanitarian crisis. But officials insist it is strictly a support role.
This is not a combat boots-on-the-ground operation, that this is not any extension of any role other for the United States other than to find ways to assist and help advise the Iraqi security forces.
Meanwhile, as a new government takes shape in Baghdad, the days in power for the country's current prime minister appear to be numbered. Nouri al-Maliki says the appointment of Haider al-Abadi as prime minister amounts to a coup. He's vowing a fight in court, but analysts say al-Maliki has little room to maneuver.
Back locally, Qingyi residents are unhappy about a government scheme to build a residential needle block in their community. Joao de Silva with the story.
The mini bus stop is located on a small plot which the government has earmarked for the construction of a private residential block. Residents claim that moving the bus stop elsewhere will affect the thousands that usually take the bus. Elderly residents would be especially affected. Today they handed in more than 500 signatures to the Town Planning Board, opposing a government proposal to allow residential construction on the site. But transportation isn't the only concern. They fear that the whole area will become overcrowded. This resident fears that the mountain and ocean views he currently enjoys from his flat will be blocked. District Councillor Eric